I was the loyal employee who worked every weekend. My phone buzzed constantly. When I finally turned it off and walked away for a week, hoping they would notice, I realized the terrifying truth. The work was redistributed in 4 minutes, and my absence was barely a footnote. I was done being a safety net. This documented case reveals a recurring pattern, a specific kind of professional withdrawal that occurs when constant availability slowly erodes an individual's perceived organizational value. Observation identifies a particular professional trajectory where consistent presence and perpetual availability gradually erode an individual's perceived worth. The manager's account illustrates a common phenomenon where boundless access transforms a resource into a presumed entitlement. When an individual consistently operates as the default solution, the go-to option for every unforeseen problem or extended project, their contribution often ceases to be recognized as exceptional. The unwavering presence becomes the expected norm. This normalization breeds a subtle form of organizational contempt. The individual's continuous dedication, once a source of admiration, slowly morphs into an assumed fixture within the operational structure. Expectations shift, and the extraordinary becomes merely ordinary. Their constant readiness is simply absorbed. This dynamic frequently manifests in environments where boundaries are permeable, and the expectation of immediate response overrides personal space. Professionals who consistently answer late-night emails or resolve weekend emergencies unintentionally condition their peers and superiors to anticipate such behavior. The very act of being perpetually accessible inadvertently diminishes the value of their actual presence. The more readily available a person appears, the less unique their contribution can seem. Constant contact breeds complacency. The silent exit in this context does not represent a sudden act of rebellion, but rather the culmination of a slow internal re-evaluation. It is the recognition that an individual's continued self-sacrifice has ceased to generate reciprocal appreciation or respect. The C-level manager, in this instance, observed that their sustained effort, rather than elevating their standing, had instead reduced them to a utility. A profound shift occurs internally. The realization surfaces that their value is not amplified by their omnipresence, but inversely diminished by it. Their constant availability had fostered an environment where their specific skills were no longer valued for their uniqueness, but for their sheer accessibility. The system had become accustomed. The manager's description of work redistribution in 4 minutes and their absence being barely a footnote reveals a critical insight into the system's perception. It demonstrates that the organization had adapted to their constant support to such an extent that their individual contribution was no longer seen as indispensable. The system had learned to account for their presence without truly valuing it. The experience triggered a profound recalibration. This silent withdrawal represents a conscious choice to reclaim personal agency, to re-establish a boundary where none previously existed. It is a reassertion of self. This pattern extends beyond corporate settings, frequently appearing in personal relationships where one individual consistently serves as the emotional or practical safety net for another. The person who always listens, always helps, always forgives, can find their empathy and support taken for granted. Their boundless patience becomes an assumed constant. The absence of a clear boundary around their availability can inadvertently invite a lack of consideration. Such individuals often discover that their unwavering presence encourages a casual disregard for their needs. They become a predictable resource. The eventual quiet withdrawal from such dynamics is often a final, desperate attempt to communicate a value that constant presence failed to convey. It is a declaration of limits. Ancient texts offer profound insights into the deliberate use of withdrawal as a means of re-evaluation and recalibration. The Hebrew root word, midbar, provides a foundational concept, typically translated as desert or wilderness. Yet its etymological depth extends further, suggesting the mouth that speaks or the place of sorting. This linguistic layering implies that the desert is not merely an empty expanse, but a crucible for clarity, a site where core truths are articulated and differentiated. The vast, silent landscapes serve as a natural filter. The desert, in this ancient understanding, is a space of removal, a deliberate separation from the clamor and complexities of settled life. It is where one confronts stark reality. This physical distance facilitates an internal sorting, a process of distinguishing the core from the superfluous. The arid plains and rocky outcrops force a confrontation with core existence. This is where distractions fall away. Consider the figure of Moses, who spent 40 years in the wilderness of Midian before his divine encounter at the burning bush. His prolonged sojourn was not a period of idleness, but a profound apprenticeship in solitude and observation. He learned the rhythms of the land. Away from the opulence of Pharaoh's court and the anxieties of the Hebrew people, Moses underwent a transformation. The silent, expansive desert provided an environment for introspection, for a stripping away of former identities and assumptions. His character was forged in the heat and silence. Similarly, the prophet Elijah, fleeing the wrath of Queen Jezebel, sought refuge in the wilderness, eventually reaching Mount Horeb. There, amidst dramatic natural phenomena, a mighty wind, an earthquake, and a fire, the divine presence was revealed not in the spectacular, but in a still small voice, or as some translations render it, the sound of sheer silence. The desert experience taught him discernment. This narrative underscores the idea that profound revelation and true understanding often emerge from a deep quietude, away from external noise and grand displays. The vast emptiness held a lesson. The gravel underfoot, the silent sands stretching to the horizon, the stark, unadorned landscape itself all contribute to this ancient understanding of value. In the midbar, one's worth is not determined by external validation or the clamor of a crowd, but by an internal reckoning. It is a place where self-sufficiency and inner strength are cultivated. The desert strips away pretension. The figures of Moses and Elijah illustrate that deliberate, sustained withdrawal into a place of sorting can precede profound shifts in purpose and influence. Their time in the wilderness was not an abandonment of their calling, but a necessary preparation, a period of silent cultivation that eventually amplified their subsequent impact. Their temporary absence fortified their future presence. The desert, therefore, functions as a powerful, ancient anchor for understanding how strategic disengagement can redefine and elevate perceived value. It is a strategic retreat. The philosophy of Stoicism, particularly through the writings of Marcus Aurelius, offers another profound perspective on the power of internal withdrawal. His concept of the inner citadel describes a mental fortress, a sanctuary of reason and calm that stands impervious to external chaos and the clamor of public opinion. This citadel is not a place of escape, but a fortified core of self. It is a place of unshakable resolve. Observe a physical stone citadel, its walls thick and unyielding, its battlements observing the surrounding landscape with quiet vigilance. Outside, the world might rage with screaming crowds, political turmoil, or personal affronts. Inside, however, the citadel remains serene, its inhabitants protected from the storm. Its strength resides in its immovability. The structure endures. The inner citadel functions as a psychological boundary, a deliberate separation between the self and the external world's demands and judgments. It is a space where the individual's worth is not dictated by the fleeting opinions of others or the vagaries of fortune. The self is sovereign within these walls. One's value is internally affirmed. This internal retreat is not an act of cowardice or indifference, but a strategic fortification of the self against external pressures that seek to define or diminish it. It is a refusal to be swayed. Marcus Aurelius understood that constant engagement with external events, particularly those beyond one's control, depletes mental and emotional resources. The individual who constantly seeks validation from the outside world risks becoming a slave to its ever-changing whims. To be always on for the external world is to cede control of one's inner state. The wise withdraw inward. The strength of the inner citadel lies in its silence, its capacity to observe without immediate reaction, to process information without emotional entanglement. It stands as a monument to the power of self-containment. When an individual cultivates this internal fortress, their presence in the external world becomes less about seeking approval and more about acting from a place of considered purpose. Their actions carry greater weight. The quiet resilience of the citadel teaches that true value emanates from an unshakable inner core rather than from external accolades or incessant availability. It is a source of authority. The physical stone citadel, standing silent against the screaming crowd, embodies this principle. Its existence defines its space, not by engaging with the noise, but by simply being. Its silent, enduring presence dictates its significance. It does not need to shout to assert its power. The Stoic ideal suggests that by cultivating this internal distance, an individual's true worth becomes more apparent, precisely because it is no longer contingent upon external affirmation. This inner strength projects outward. The inner citadel serves as a powerful gold anchor for understanding how a deliberate internal withdrawal strengthens one's perceived and actual value. It is a bastion of self. The observation of human behavior reveals a clear pattern. The strategic implementation of silence, whether physical or communicative, fundamentally alters the perception of an individual's value. It is not an act of malice, but a recalibration. When an individual consistently operates as an always-on resource, the very definition of their contribution shifts from being a valuable asset to an expected utility. The absence of a boundary around availability invites a subtle but steady devaluation. Their constant presence becomes a given. The boundary of silence is a deliberate act of self-definition. It is a conscious decision to delineate personal space and time, to control the flow of access and information. This boundary serves as a protective mechanism, safeguarding an individual's energy and focus from external demands that might otherwise deplete them. It reclaims agency. When an individual withdraws from constant availability, their eventual engagement carries greater weight, their words more resonance, their presence more impact. The scarcity of their immediate response elevates the significance of their eventual one. Their time becomes more precious. This measured disengagement forces others to recognize the individual's contribution as distinct and valuable, rather than simply an assumed constant. It shifts the dynamic from passive consumption of their availability to an active appreciation of their presence. The silent exit is thus a powerful reassertion of worth. It is a declaration of limits. Consider the quiet practice, a single, tiny, physical offline action. This could involve leaving a phone in a locked drawer for a full hour, consciously walking through a park without any headphones, or simply dedicating 5 minutes to observing a single tree outside a window without any other distraction. These small, deliberate acts of disengagement serve to reestablish an internal locus of control and a personal boundary against the incessant demands of the external world. They are small acts of defiance. The cumulative effect of such quiet practices is a subtle but profound reordering of priorities, both for the individual and for those who interact with them. It cultivates an inner resilience, a connection to the midbar and the inner citadel. The individual learns to value their own time and presence, and this internal valuation gradually projects outward, influencing how others perceive them. It is a quiet revolution. If one observes a professional or a personal relationship where one individual's constant availability has bred contempt, where their unwavering presence has inversely diminished their perceived value,